I'm excited to be here. You know, there's not many opportunities that you get to talk about two things that you're extremely passionate about. And like a lot of us in this room, I wear multiple hats. So as well as a conservationist and very passionate about that, I'm also a producer and a rancher. And so, you know, my hat's off to these great stewards across our past couple panel, but also around this is that, you know, without you guys keeping working lands working and your passion and leadership, and I really appreciate your stewardship, and God bless each of you. Thank you. So, you know, I kind of feel like I said, I'm excited about this because I kind of feel like a first-time grandmother with her portfolio with her kids and grandkids, and I gotta get to share a little of this with you. Unfortunately, we have just a short time, so hopefully I can kind of get you to think kind of outside the box and kind of think about management and kind of help us move forward together as we come along in this journey. Some of the discussion points that I have is we're really going to talk about what are we managing for, and how are we going to get there to manage towards that success. And what are these bottlenecks that we have? And I think before we kind of start getting into grazing and fire and stocking rates, we really have to really briefly discuss the plant succession as it orders. So this orderly change of plants and the plant communities to this climax community. I think all of us in this understand this, and this is really what we're managing for. So it's really influenced by the soils, the rainfall, and it's really about grazing and fire, and we're going to talk about mowing and other things of really setting back that plant succession. And we can do this through grazing and fire. When we really start thinking about our southern Great Plains and where we're sitting now, our ecosystem was really developed around grazing and fire and this disturbance and these things. So getting back to that natural aspect and managing these lands in this form is going to really help all of us. And this is nothing new to us. Aldo Leopold stated this in the game management book of game can be restored by creating the use of the same tools and also destroyed by the axe, the plow, the cow, the fire, and the gun. And this goes on beyond the game management. It's really about the land management. It's the processes of grazing and fire, but it's the proper use of grazing and fire, right? So it's really about meeting these resource objectives. The management really should be focused on some key things. It's about the timing, the distribution, the frequency, and the intensity. So we're talking about the timing of our grazing, our timing of when we put fire on the ground, the distribution of how we are doing that grazing management. How are we rotating those cattle? Where are we putting fire on the ground and when? It's the frequency of that fire. Is it annually? Is it every 2 years, 3 years, a 5 year? It's also the frequency of how we graze. It's the intensity, right? So we can do it's the intensity of that grazing, a high stock density. But one thing that we have to think about is when we are disturbing this, sometimes we're looking at it not this growing season, but we're thinking forward. We should have a management plan on our place and be forward thinking. So like when we talk about a high stock density, we had a presentation yesterday kind of showing about the grazing and then we saw a negative impact. But in a lot of those situations, it's hurting that growing season. But the following growing season, it's going to more and double and flourish. So it's providing this disturbance across the landscape and multiple disturbances and intensity of that disturbance. Another thing I think we miss, what I would add is also another practice, if you want to say, that we overlook, I think, a lot of times, and that's rest. Rest is such a key component that we don't understand, just kind of like the stocking rate aspect. And rest is this time in between this disturbance. But we must really start thinking bigger than game animals. We got to start thinking bigger than our livestock. It's about perspectives. Perspectives matter, truly matter. Frank Sinatra, Mr. Blue Eyes himself, was a conservationist. He probably didn't realize that. He may not have realized that. But he understood perspectives. He understood that perspectives matter. Frank, said that he felt sorry for the people that don't drink, because when they wake up in the morning, that's as good as they're going to feel all day, right? So how we manage this deal is about perspectives. When we look along our landscapes, we have a lot of folks with the perspective of this middle management, really this uniform animal distribution to create this uniformed forage, this sea of grass, this kind of more of a high successional climax grassland. They really focus on a key plant concept. So we optimize the animal performance and the production, but we're eliminating some things of disturbances and really promoting this homogeneous pastures. Our areas are less suitable for the grazing and left for wildlife. We don't have these spring flowering plants, and a lot of times in these cases when we're at this, of our whole landscape at this aspect. So, but we are producing some fall flowering nectaring plants in this type of state. So also when we implement fire in this type of middle management concept, we're proving, it's really based on the proving forage and quality, the brush management, and it's followed by deferment of grazing. It's really about the eye appeal. It's the aesthetics, which is kind of setting us back and hurting us. We've talked about, and Bill Bartish kind of talked about, we've heard about the landscapes, and we talk about the producers and the city aspect. And we're having more and more first-time owners of land that only grew up in the city. And what are they used to seeing across? They're used to their lawns and this type of thing. And this is kind of setting us back of this aesthetics. And so perspectives matter, right? Perspectives matter. And this doesn't really provide us, our wildlife habitat or our pollinator habitat. Wildlife and pollinators really need this messy, heterogeneous landscape. My kids, they think they're conservationists as well, and you would believe it too if you looked at their room. They understand this messiness, right? This is a picture I took about a week ago of there in kind of south central Oklahoma where I run some cattle, and you can see that I'm focusing on developing a messy landscape, and it's okay to see weeds out there. It's okay. That's a good thing. That tells me that I'm managing correctly in the right direction for my operation and my objectives. We're really trying to look at the secondary plant succession. We need different successional stages across this landscape. And we need random disturbances of grazing, of the timing, the distribution, the frequency, and the intensity, again, of the grazing and the fire across that landscape. And we accomplish this by planning. It's about conservation planning. It's about boots on the ground. We need more folks. We need more NRCS. We need more extension. We need more biologists on the ground working with these landowners to help us to not just plan on the short term, but for the long term. And how do we move forward that? Our stocking rate is our number one issue we've had for many, many years. And it's like, how do we get across this concept and getting folks to understand? This is the most commonly abused aspect of grazing management. The number of animals per unit areas is our stocking rate. We start overgrazing. This prolonged overgrazing leads to prolonged overstocking leads to this overgrazing, and it starts kind of setting us back. With this, we start increasing our annuals, our perennials, increasing our bare ground, but this really starts kind of taking away some other tools for us of the burning aspect. So we can't burn, we don't have the fine fuels. So it starts kind of setting us back, and it's hard to make that move forward. So we really look at, on our stocking rate, really try to set a low to moderate stocking rate. This will increase our perennial plants or increase our diversity. It also gives us that fine fuel for our fire and implementing our fire. It's really about also provides us the flexibility and adaptive management for us as managers on that landscape of moving and being able to handle with drought and other things that come towards us. Stocking rate equals this fuel load, and how we graze and the intensity of that grazing is dependent on the fire when we move forward. Here's an example of I wanted to share with you with a fire that was mid-February, and this was kind of in Shackelford County, north of Abilene, and kind of a low stony hill, shallow site. We look at a month later, mid-March, we can kind of see that we set back some of the prickly pear and some of the invasives in there. We're starting to get a little bit of regrowth. By mid-April, we look like this. Fire is good. Fire is our area is dependent on it, and it's a matter how we implement it. Here's some milkweed that we're seeing on this site across. So what are these bottlenecks from our management, and how are we managing for them? Our bottlenecks is what are we really managing for, that perspective of looking at the whole ecosystem, our whole moving forward. Our flowering plants in the fall, we're probably a little lacking in that across our landscapes. And what can we do towards that? We can look at, again, it's about that fire. We can start increasing more summer burns, grazing in some areas where we do have some of that high successional stages where we have the fall flowering, Maximilian sunflower, and et cetera. So when we really think about this, it kind of comes back to Aldo Leopold's of these tools that we implement and how we implement those tools. We also need to know what we're managing for and watch out for these bottlenecks in this area. We need messy landscapes, and we need the proper stocking rate. Ecological systems are very complicated, and we need really these boots on the ground and helping producers, and more than just helping producers, empowering producers. And we need to understand, all of us need to understand, that we address ecological problems not by practices, but by principles. Not by practices, but by principles, right? So I mean that's by management and having that management. And we need the boots on the ground to help empower those producers to understand that management and how they properly implement those practices. As a producer, for me, we talked about cost shares and things like that. And sometimes I think we've gotten in this dilemma where we become dependent on some of these cost share dollars. And so those are great if we have the management side tied to it. And I think some of it, how the EQIP has changed over the years, that management is taken out. So we help give producers fish, but we're not teaching them how to fish. And so how do we change this and still give them incentives, still giving them practices so you can clear your cedar and make that difference, but also help you manage your land where you're not having to clear again. And so with that, thank you.